Welcome on Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by Hank South. Question for today, this morning's Saturday conversation. What isn't happening on the 40 acres? It's been a busy 24, 48-hour period. Yesterday evening, Texas gets a commitment, a football commitment from Keon Hemphill Woods, big offensive lineman out of Columbus. Also, Matas Vokatitis, the big interior guy on the basketball team, announces he's returning to Texas. Texas has other basketball recruits expected to be on campus from the transfer portal. And then, Hank, later today, the kids are going to start showing up that are visiting for unofficial visits for Texas. There's already guys that are on campus for unofficial visits as we speak, and they're spending the night tonight. And then Texas has a scrimmage this morning too. So a lot of stuff going on the 40 acres. Let's start, though, with something that actually happened on Thursday. You got a chance to sit down with Texas assistant coaches, not only Will Muschamp, but you talked to defensive back coach or cornerback coach Mark Orfe, safeties coach Blake Gideon, La'Allen Clark, the defensive ends coach. I want to hear some of what they talked with you about. Let's start with La'Allen Clark and get your take on your conversation with him, what he said about some of his players, and where they're standing this spring.
Yeah, I mean, and first off, and I know this is something you've mentioned also too, but like, when's the last time, we got assistant coaches in the spring to talk to? I think this is kind of evidence that Steve Sarkisian really likes this team. And, you've been all over on Texas Football talking about this, but usually this is a situation where you get the coordinators the day before fall camp starts and then the coaches for a little bit. We're getting this in April. So, I think that's
Gary, you're right. It's fundamentally different.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally different. And it leads you to believe, at least in my history covering Texas and around the country, it leads you to believe there's some confidence within that building about what the product is going to look like this fall. Otherwise, you don't let La'Allen Clark go out there and talk about guys he wants to talk about, et cetera. So let's get into that.
Exactly.
La'Allen Clark, you kind of summarize that conversation you had with him, and maybe mention some names that he called out to you.
Yeah, and obviously, when you're talking to the edge coach at the University of Texas this year, it's going to start with Colin Simmons. I don't think there's anything we could say about Colin Simmons that people aren't already thinking, like All-American type talent. Steve Sarkisian's talked about it throughout the spring, and La'Allen Clark echoed it. He's just on a different level at this point in time. He's taking practice. He's practicing like a pro, is the exact quote from Sark. And La'Allen Clark couldn't say enough good things about him and what he's done for that room. So, my curiosity, we knew what Colin Simmons was. My curiosity is who the other guys. Lance Jackson, he said, is coming along really well. Obviously, he's a guy that's going to play in multiple different things in Will Muschamp's scheme. I know Jerry's kind of compared it to almost kind of a Michael Williams, if you remember that. I don't want to remember in Austin, with Georgia coming to town in 2024. But if that gives you any kind of hope for what Lance Jackson could develop into. But what a guy who I keep hearing about this spring, and we talked about this, I think 2 Saturday conversations ago, is Zina Yomazolu, who obviously, looked at the portal, kind of flirted with it a little bit, decided to come back. And his nickname is Zoo. La'Allen Clark's calling him Zoo. He was so confident in the way he was speaking about him. He said Zina has a chance for this to be his last year at Texas, and that not to go to the portal, to go to the NFL draft after the 2026 season, which is, I think, saying a lot considering, it's Colin Simmons, it's Lance Jackson on the other end. We'll see where Zina factors in. Obviously, he's going to be in the rotation, but he absolutely loves this kid. And it looks like he's taking this development angle and the fact that he decided to stay and kind of trust the process, his relationship with La'Allen Clark. And on that, La'Allen said he thinks and we'll have to, I don't know how we would actually look this up, but he's like, I might be the only position coach in the country that didn't lose a kid to the portal, which is saying something in this area of college football. That the fact, Zina was close maybe, but he decided to stay. Colton Vosick is staying. Obviously, Colin Simmons was staying. And then what I really liked hearing from him is he loves these freshmen with Richie Wesley and Jamarian Carlton. He couldn't say enough good things about him, and kind of his personal interest in like the fact that Richie Wesley is his first commitment since he joined the staff. Like, that was a guy, and he was joking about how his pool jump with Dan Lanning committing to Oregon. And I feel like Sark said something about that at some point too, where they're like, they saw him commit to Oregon, but they knew he was coming to Texas. Like it wasn't really a concern, but he joked about him, but said, he's a guy that can make an impact in year one at Texas. And remember, Richie Wesley just turned 18. If not, he's still, I think he turned 18, and you might know better than me, but he's a young kid. Like he's supposed to be going into his senior year of high school right now.
Right.
To hear that he can maybe be making an impact year one in Austin. Jamarian Carlton was a guy Alan Clark recruited at Ohio State. That translated back down to Austin when he came to Texas, and obviously they flipped him from Baylor. So a lot to be excited about with these young edge rushers. All the hype goes to Colin Simmons, and it should. I mean, he's a stud, but don't want to forget about Zena. Don't want to forget about Lance Jackson and what these guys can do in this room.
Call him Zoo.
Yeah.
Call him Zoo from now on. Yeah. It's interesting though, because to have that's more than just saying, hey, he's looking good.
Right.
That's more like, hey, this could be his last year. He's a redshirt sophomore.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's high praise. Take me through Mark Orfe, cornerback coach. I know you got a chance to talk with him a little bit. What did you hear there that caught your attention?
So I caught up with Mark Orfe, the cornerbacks coach, on the tail end. So I got one question, and I just, curiosity. Obviously, he's the DB coach, but a lot of the talk has been about wide receivers this season, or this off season. Obviously, Cam Coleman, I asked, who are the guys giving your DBs fits? And obviously Cam Coleman's giving everybody fits. We saw the picture of him mossing Samari Matthews, true freshman moment. Think Samari Matthews will be fine. He was actually in really good position. It's just Cam Coleman. What can you do?
Yeah.
But he mentioned the freshmen, and not just Jermaine Bishop. That's a guy we talk about a lot, but Cohen Brown, Chris Stewart. He said these guys are really bought in to learning from Cam Coleman, to learning from Ryan Wingo, to learning from Emmett Mosley and the older guys in the room, Sterling Burkhalter. And he said, they'll go out there, do the reps. They're working hard. They're running good routes, and then they'll come back to the huddle and talk about what they saw from the DBs, or what they saw, what they should try to do this next time. Talk with Chris Jackson, the wide receivers coach. I thought that was really interesting. The first guys he mentioned were the true freshmen in the room at wide receiver. So, that's got to be a positive sign in terms of your depth at the position. Who probably the starting three are, but the guys behind, if they need to dip into that rotation.
You talked with Blake Gideon, safeties coach, who returned to Texas, former Texas player, but spent one season at Georgia Tech as the defensive coordinator, now returns to Texas. What did Coach Gideon allow?
Yeah, he's I think this guy, he's excited to be back at Texas. And what was interesting, he was joking. He said the first call, it wasn't Sark. Okay, so his process in coming back to Texas from Georgia Tech, it was Sark checked in with Brent Key, the head coach at Georgia Tech, because he does things the right way. He wanted to do things the right way. And then after he, got his blessing, or, told him he was going to kind of talk to Blake Gideon, Will Muschamp was the first call to Blake Gideon. That was the guy he wanted to get back on the staff, and casual football conversation. And then he kind of said, hey, what would you think about coming back to Texas? Kind of just putting it out there. And then there's like, well, let's try to see how this would make sense, or how this would work. And so obviously it worked. He came back to Texas. They were able to get him back to his alma mater. And I think one of the biggest things he said is, he wanted to get back, and, time flies so much. Blake Gideon was coaching, Makuba and those guys in 2024. He goes to Georgia Tech for one season, but he said he wanted to get back to where he could finish coaching Derek Williams, who he recruited from Louisiana, finish, coaching Jonah Williams, or get him going, because obviously he was a major part of his commitment back in the 2025 class. Xavier Filsaime, who he had a large role in flipping from Florida in that 2024 class. I'm trying to think of the years now, that a few years ago, and then the rest of the guys in that room. And he said, selfishly, I want to win a national championship in my alma mater. And so, I posted the clip on my Twitter and on Texas football. He's excited to be coaching under Will Muschamp, who obviously, he goes back with, and, he talked about, just the level of detail. He said the schematics and everything is kind of all, everyone has different versions of what they call, or what they name things, or how they describe things. But he said it's just the attention to detail with Will Muschamp, and the preparation and the development aspect that you don't always see, in terms of play calling, or how they're lined up. It's what goes into getting them out there. He said that's been the biggest thing, that's changed from him. And so, yeah, he's excited to be back. And I think he's locked in. I think you look at this secondary, You got Will Muschamp coaching nickels, you got Blake Gideon coaching safeties, and you got Mark Orfe coaching corners. I mean, that's a pretty good lineup right there. And then obviously Muschamp's calling the defense overall. I think there's plenty of reasons to be optimistic about this secondary kind of taking that next step forward, especially, in a year where you're losing a leader like Michael Taff or Manny Muhammad. I think they can kind of pick up where those guys left off.
Hey, Hank, is Muschamp coaching the nickels? I thought Muschamp was coaching the nickels and Gideon the safeties. Is that
right? That's right. I think is that what I said? Maybe I didn't say that.
I think you may have misspoke, but
my bad. Yeah. No,
it's early Saturday. We're both allowed a mistake or two. Speaking of early, the players expected on campus this weekend for the University of Texas. Some of the top recruits that have already been on campus. Ismail Kamara out of Gilmer, a couple others that you want to share for folks to be tracking a little bit this weekend.
Yeah, it's going to be a very busy weekend. And like you said, Ismail Kamara, big offensive line target. They just landed Keon Hemphill Woods last night. Have two guys in the class now with him and Jackson Cook, your in-state guys, and they want to get to 4 or 5 in this class. So I think you're looking more at tackles now going forward. And, we'll see who else interior-wise joins the fold. But guys on Saturday and maybe arriving late Friday, Aking Hall, 4-star cornerback from Dothan, Alabama. He's committed to Oregon. And what's interesting about that, we were just talking about Richie Wesley, guy that gets to Oregon for the first time, the first visit, feels the love, gets excited about Eugene, commits, but now he's visiting Texas. We'll see. I'm not saying, he's on flip watch or anything, but maybe jump the gun a little bit committing to Oregon. And as I look at it and, coming to Texas the next weekend, we'll see. It's his first visit to Texas. We'll see what he thinks about Austin. I'm sure he'll have a pretty good time and maybe, want to come back. Big time cornerback, another guy from the state of Alabama, Jabarius Garor, a 4-star edge rusher who was committed to Alabama for a time. He's since decommitted. He was actually committed to Alabama since the summer of 24. So he's been there through the whole DeBoer era. He's backed off now, and he's looking at other options, and Texas is one of them. This will be his first visit. And then stud linebacker out of North Carolina that's expected in, Aronson Randall from Garner, North Carolina. We've seen guys like Jaden Nelson, who is a big linebacker target for Texas. He's since committed to Texas Tech. I'm curious to see where things go maybe now with Aronson Randall, who's coming in from North Carolina. He was supposed to be on campus March 28th. He moved a Florida visit to that weekend, and now he's at Texas this weekend. So we'll see where things go there. But, obviously linebacker recruiting is a hot topic. It's a spot that Texas hasn't signed a huge number of guys from the high school level in recent cycles, more so this year, Rocky Cummings and Kosi Okpala, Tyler Atkinson, but we'll see, if they can start, boosting that number a little bit more as the classes come.
Well, that's good on football. Let's sum up basketball really quick, because I know you got to actually get out to Moncrief Newhouse to follow some of this recruiting as well as the scrimmage that's getting ready to go on. The question on basketball, Matas Vukatitis announced that he's returning yesterday. That's huge. He's probably the centerpiece. Some people call him if he would have went in the portal, would have been in one of the top 5 prospects in the entire portal. Texas retains him. That's huge for next season. Dalen Swain, the guard, is still entering the NBA draft, not entering the portal, which means if he returns to Texas or if he returns to college basketball, he's going to return to Texas.
Yeah.
Now, there's other pieces of the puzzle that Texas is trying to figure out, some of whom might be on campus, some of them who may be closing in on a decision. Who are a couple of those names that Texas basketball fans need to be aware of almost immediately right now that Vukatitis has announced he's returning? Yeah,
and just to echo, Vukatitis, you can look at that as almost a commitment. He never went in the portal, but just to be able to retain him and have that size down in the paint. That's
he was terrific down the stretch. Terrific.
Down the stretch, people had their thoughts throughout the season, but I think you certainly saw why Texas coveted him so much in that AAC Freshman of the Year prior coming to Texas. But Texas, they've got some roster spots open now. We've seen Nick Cody go in the portal, Simeon Wilcher, Cam Heidi kind of surprised some on Thursday by putting his name into the portal. So they're going to need to add some guys, and a couple of them that we've mentioned on Texas Football. Isaiah Johnson, Colorado point guard, freshman this past season, so he's going into his sophomore year. a kid that came up relatively under the radar. I mean, I need to pull up his stats right in front of me. I want to say as a freshman at Colorado, he averaged 16.9 points, 3 assists, 2.9 rebounds a game. And this is a kid that chose, assuming, his recruiting profile is accurate, chose Colorado over New Mexico State, Rice, Sam Houston, and a few others. And what I like about him, and I don't try to claim to be a Jerry Hamilton of basketball knowledge, his best games, if you look at his stats, and you're playing a Big 12, you're playing pretty top competition week in and week out.
Yeah.
Some of his best outings came against top competition. He had against Arizona, he had 28 points in the Big 12 tournament. Against BYU, he had a season high 10 made field goals. So top competition, he seems to thrive with, playing against. And another interesting note on on Isaiah Johnson is his dad, Chris, is an NBA trainer who's worked with guys like LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Tyrese Maxey. So kid's been around basketball. And you can see why I think he's a top 10 prospect in the portal right now. So that's a guy, when you're replacing Jordan Pope, you need a point guard. This is a guy that, people are keying in on, and certainly Texas is. And another guy, as you're replacing Nick Cody and kind of those forwards, David Punch from TCU, who's Big 12 honorable all honorable mention. 12. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the exact terminology, but Big 12 honorable mention, recorded 5 double-doubles this season, had a double-double against Ohio State, 16-point, 13 rebound game against Ohio State in that first round of the NCAA tournament when they beat the Buckeyes. 6'7", 246 pounds. So certainly a guy that's pretty bulked up. Averaged 14 points on the season on 50% shooting. So when he entered the portal, I was told it's going to be Texas or Texas A&M for him. So it looks like he's looking at staying in the state of Texas. So certainly a guy Texas has high interest in. But again, as Jerry's noted on Texas football, basketball portal is nuts. I mean, there's guys that aren't in that are going to enter. They have until April 21st to enter. And so, your top target today could be your third tier target tomorrow, depending on just who's available. But, Isaiah Johnson, David Punch, I think that's a good starting point of guys to really key in on if you're trying to track all this craziness.
Yeah. Johnson originally from the state of California. If you're LA area, Punch went to Harker Heights High School in Killeen, just down the road from Austin. All right. That's going to do it for this episode of the Saturday Conversation. Baseball, softball, we got more coming today, but a lot of recruits and that this second spring scrimmage will be a little bit later. Hopefully we'll have a report for you guys there as well. For Hank South and our producer, Matt Hutchinson, I'm Bobby Burton. Hope you guys have a good weekend. Hook 'em horns.